Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the MNCAA podcast, Gophers edition, episode 131. Nate Wells here, along with myself, Drew Cove, as always, talking about the Gophers. No matter what happens on the weekend, and Nate, it certainly was a little bit of a 280 from a 180. Jeez, 280. Where does that come from? Must have been on the freeways. And
I was gonna say we're leaving campus, we're going north.
Jeez,
yeah.
180 from weekend to weekend against Michigan to Michigan State. The Gophers come away with just 1 point on the weekend, losing in the shootout 4-3 on Friday, and then in regulation 5-3 on Saturday, blowing a 3-1 third period lead. Very uncharacteristic of the Gophers. We'll talk about it in a second, but Nate, obviously, I think let's start with the most bright spot in terms of points wise. The 1 point they got on the weekend in Friday's game. Let's just dive in right away. It's the thing we ended the last week's podcast with, but the Taconite jerseys, we saw them in action on the ice in Friday's game.
They looked better on the ice than I thought they would, so I will give them that. I'm still not completely sold. I will accept that they are not for me. They're certainly for the players on the ice. They're for a younger generation. My old madness will be okay with that. Mm-hmm. But you know what? The fact that I can read the numbers, I can read everything on there. I'm still scarred from that time the Ohio State women's team had black numbers and a black jersey, and I was in the building, and you cannot read them. It's the only time I've ever seen a team get actually a penalty at the start of the game for equipment violation. You cannot read them.
Mm-hmm. And considering Ritter's press box or the suite you watch from Ritter is not far from the ice. It's not like Mariucci for how far that is away. Like, it's understandable to not be able to see the numbers on a lot of jerseys, even normally colored at Mariucci, but at Ritter, you're close enough where almost regardless of the color, you should be able to see, but those were so egregious.
Yeah, Jinsey Dunn became my favorite player at Ohio State because her name didn't end with an S and her numbers were not anywhere starting with the twos. Because there was a stretch where I'm looking around and I'm like, I'm reading the line sheet. I'm like, there are three left wingers and they all end with S, and their all numbers are in the twos. Oh, you son of a! It made for a great like story in the Athletic with Allison Lukin, where it was where Nadine Muzerall just took it and ran. She's like, "Hey, look, I'd rather be Darth Vader, and if you're gonna hate it, I hate it." Mm-hmm. And they fixed it. The jerseys were better the next year, but like, I'm still scarred because of that. That anytime someone brings up the new jerseys and you don't see the numbers right away, I'm like, can I read these? Selfishly, I need to know.
Exactly. I thought they looked good on the ice. I know a lot of people were deriding them. I know they certainly look it does look a little UMD-ish at times, just with the way the colors pop and just kind of the way they format their colors usually. But I thought they looked good on the ice. I thought they looked better than they did in the promo photos, but obviously not a great taste when you don't get a win out of it. Gophers lose, like we said before, in the shootout 4-3. They had various points of a lead. Michigan State didn't lead until till nearly the end. But I thought, that was the one, Nate, we were talking a little bit before the show started. That was the one that got away for the Gophers. I think both the games could have gotten away, but I thought they played so well for a majority of the game on Friday that just all the chances they got in the first period and most of the second period, I thought Trey Augustine got them just as Trey Augustine's going to do. It's hard to go against you can get goalied by a goalie you don't expect it, but you almost kind of expect to get goalied a certain amount of times against Trey Augustine just because he's so good. But yeah, that was I think there were a lot of scoring chances that against a lot of other teams the Gophers have played this year would have gone in and they would have had a pretty sizable advantage, but just one that ended up not going their way.
It speaks really well to where Michigan State is, that they're that balanced. They have a goaltender who he's not quite stealing games, but he puts your team in a position that you are going to be successful and win more often than not, where the other team has to really pick and choose their spots. And granted, Minnesota, even a decimated Minnesota offense, where lineup chart for Friday, 10 forwards, Nick Michael on the line of his own. He gets kicked out of the game at a certain point. Aaron Huglen, thank goodness that Aaron Huglen came back after missing last weekend. And then you lose. Oh, wait. Who left that game too for a bit?
Brody Zemer left.
Brody Zemer, yeah,
went down the
yeah.
tunnel for a little bit and came back because I mean, at some point, like you gotta like the ink budget at the U is saved based on those line charts this week because there was there was just so many gaps. I mean, they were really just playing with 3 lines and a couple of extra forwards. And heavy quotes on the forwards there if you're just listening to the podcast this week. But it was a very intriguing sight, and we haven't seen this happen with the Gophers in a very long time.
No, it felt like a Brad Frost lineup at certain points where he's like, I'm gonna roll 2 lines because I can roll 2 lines, and yeah, I have 4 defenders who are better than your 6 defenders, so screw it. You can't really get away with that in men's hockey. You can't really get away with that in women's hockey these days, but that's another story. And it was certainly something where the Gophers got off to about as well of a start as you could, score in the opening shift, and then you continue to press. But as you are against a team like Michigan State, you need to be bringing your A game. And when you're without your entire 4th lines on the shelf and you're without several other players and others are stepping up into new roles, it can certainly be tough. And I think the difference, especially in Friday and even more across the weekend, was Michigan State is a team that they will make your mistakes pay. Mm-hmm. And granted, not everything is going to go well. The Gophers as a whole throughout the entire first half, they've been fantastic when things aren't going their way. And it's been a great first half, but things have certainly not gone their way at times with injuries, with calls, with shots and opportunities. But when things don't go your way, the best teams are able to come back and find ways to get back in the game or find ways to win or limit the damage. And they haven't played a team quite like Michigan State, who has made their mistakes and their missed opportunities just pay in the same way. And in a weekend where you are down multiple forwards, your depth is certainly being tested. You're at the end of a half where they haven't had a bye. Mm-hmm. And you certainly kind of saw it at times on Friday. You certainly saw it on Saturday where things are going great. You take a penalty, and then all of a sudden Michigan State scores. It's 1-0, and that to me is kind of the difference of the weekend, and certainly something that we'll talk a little bit more as to how it appears for going into the second half of the season.
Yeah, and it's certainly on Friday, especially when the Gophers looked really electric in various points, and they were getting a lot of chances on Augustine, and kind of forcing a lot of mistakes from the Michigan State defenders. They went and did that too. There's a lot of turnovers off in the neutral zone, a lot of like aggressive forechecking that caused silly clears and things that, like, if there was one thing on the weekend that just didn't go right for the Gophers, it really led to just a lot of damage, was just a clear that the Michigan State players either like jumping up to go grab, and bring it down with his hand before it clears the zone, or just like a weak shot that can't get out because the team's gassed at various points, and then they turn right back around and just use all of their talent, a la what the Gophers typically do, just rely on the talent to make something happen from a broken clear and a newfound chance in the offensive zone. But one thing I like to see out of Friday's game too, Nathan Airy, he finally, and I know that's like, it's not the bad thing that we haven't seen flash out of him, but saw some flash out of him this weekend. I thought he was at times just as good as Trey Augustine, and that's not to say that he's never anywhere close to Augustine's level. Just Augustine's always got the hype, and I know we've certainly been a party to that on this podcast. But Nathan Airy's showing that he can keep pace with one of the most hyped goaltenders in the country against one of the better offenses in the conference and in the country. And I thought he looked really good and showing some flash and making the big save that we've seen Soulier make many times so far this year. Seeing him really get in the action on the biggest stage so far this season.
It almost feels like the best thing for his mental game was to get that second game in the Notre Dame series, where that Friday night, it wasn't his best performance. The Gophers were certainly lucky. It wasn't 2-0 5 minutes in, but he was able to rebound and kind of come back stronger. And it feels like each start that he has, each Friday night, has been, you're getting a better Nathan Airy. And yeah, I will agree. I thought that he was matching Trey Augustine, which is no easy feat to do in college hockey. And you had two teams that certainly were matching one another. You can see where Michigan State is trying to go. And in a way, this game, do you remember the Michigan series about 3 years ago where the Gophers went to Yost and they were playing a kind of a decimated Michigan team with illness.
Third string goalie was like lined up as like an extra skater, I think.
Yeah. This felt like the hockey gods, like the inverse of that, where the Gophers win and they swept Michigan that series. You're like, the 6 points are going to be important at the end of the year come Big Ten time. But we don't really know what we learned about the Gophers or what we learned about Michigan in that series, as they're both teams I'm sure looking to make the Frozen Four, and they eventually made the Frozen Four that year. Mm-hmm. And this kind of feels like that same one where I'm like, I learned a little bit about Michigan State that, they're able to match Minnesota, what Minnesota is trying to do with their game much better than Michigan, much better than any other team in the Big Ten. I learned that the Gophers are a resilient bunch. And you saw it at times where they give up a goal and within 2 minutes they get that goal back, or they're able to just kind of create chances. And until the last 10 minutes of the third period, and I will ask you kind of just the big question of the weekend is, is this more on, do you learn more about Michigan State on that end where they're able to make that comeback from a 3-1 deficit, or is it more on just, this is what Minnesota has playing a good team, they're playing them shorthanded? Do you learn, or do you kind of give them a little bit of a push on that one, and it's, that they're playing shorthanded?
Yeah, it's close because I don't want to say, all right, well, because those guys are all, I mean, you got a lot of energy as like a young college team, a bunch of young guys that are good at playing the game. They've got a lot of energy. And you know what, you think it's various points they can make up a lot of those mistakes or a lot of those shortcomings from a lineup standpoint. So if everyone's got to be double shifted or an extra shift here and there for a bunch of guys as time goes on, they can get through it. But I mean, I think the combination of being shorthanded, if they were shorthanded against any other team they played this year, I think they still would have. I mean, they would have been able to hold those leads. I mean, yeah, let's pump the brakes a little bit on not that we're saying the Gopher season is over or anything, but I'm just saying like 1 point on the weekend doesn't look good, but they had multiple leads at various points. And like, especially as we'll talk about on Saturday, it just kind of fell apart at the end. And obviously you got to play the full 60 minutes, but against a team like Michigan State, I think that's a lot harder to maintain with that lineup than any other team they've played this year. So it is like, I'm going to do it like I do frequently. It's like, all right, I'm going to say it give good reasons to both sides. But I would just say, too, I mean, I think the biggest part is that Michigan State's just a bona fide national championship contender. That's like full stop. I think the Gophers, if they're at full strength or not full strength, I think this series could have ended with 0, 1, 2, 3. I mean, any point on the scale that the Gophers could have had, it could have been a crapshoot, because I think while Michigan State's a bona fide national championship contender, I think based on the body of work so far this season for the Gophers, plus this weekend, I'm not straying from the calling card that they're also a national championship contender. So I think regardless of the way the lineup looked, I think Michigan State could have done that to the Gophers, but I don't think it was helped that they had so many fewer regular options at that point. What do you think?
It feels like this is the perfect weekend to end the first half. And if you're Bob Moscow, you have so many lessons, because it could turn into, hey, this is the best thing that happened to us as we make a run. And, we had a 3-1 lead against a top team, and we still were aggressive. And certainly when things turned away, and they turned right quickly. And this is the first time you kind of seen that with Minnesota, where you see a 1-goal, a 2-goal lead all of a sudden disappear, and the other team is able to come back. It's not something that has been a regular occurrence, especially, I mean, even compared to several of the other top teams nationally and just throughout the country. You can take it you can look at it a little bit glass half full of, hey, we're without 4, 5, 6 top players, and we're still able to hang with a team that you can make a good argument is a national championship contender. And I would certainly say that Michigan State looks like they're a national championship contender right now, which, again, credit to Adam Nightingale. This This is season 3, and this is season 3, and it's just turning the way that program has turned around so quickly is just, I will give a lot of props to them. It's really nice to see. I know a lot of people in that program, and they've gone through a lot of rough patches to get to this point. So it is nice to see on that end. But you get things to be happy with. You get things to be working on. You get things to look at as you go into the second half. So you end up with a lot of nice lessons where you can you know where you are in the season, and you know this is to not fully represent the full picture of what Minnesota hockey is compared to the top teams. At the same time, though, it's probably great if you're Bob Moscow. You're like, I'm glad that this happened now, and I'm glad this is the way that happened because we get to have some fun at the during winter break.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how they approach it, especially with no games, as we'll talk about for a few weeks here, up until the vaunted matchup against Mercyhurst. But Nate, to kind of put a bow on Friday's game too, I know I think everyone's going to want to hear about it because they've been hearing about it every time this happens for the last 5 years, or almost 5 years. February, dating back to February 2020, actually. The name Brandon McManus comes to mind for a lot of people. Friday's game ended in a shootout, as everyone knows. The Gophers lost that, but they also didn't manage to score a goal in that attempt. Erie led in 2, and the Gophers didn't score 2. I believe it was Zemer and Lamb, who we'll talk about again, both of those guys in just a little bit as we go through our normal roster discussion.
Yeah. Mason Nevers, we miss you.
I know, exactly, right? That would have been such a we'll talk about it. That would have been a guy that would have been so valuable come down the stretch Saturday. But Gophers don't score in the shootout. That I mean, it's hard to continue to just find something to say about it, right, Nate? I mean, it's like we said, it's almost going on. I think it's mid-February 2020 was the last time they actually scored a goal, not just won a shootout. Scored a goal in the shootout, and it's a guy who hasn't been on the team in as many years.
We're reaching a point. We're reaching a point where almost everyone, like no one's on the team left. I think is Hugo the only one left?
Probably. I mean, Jackson Nelson usually is the favorite on the. This guy has been on the team since XYZ thing happened, but. Yeah, no, it's got to be close.
It's gone around. Like, it was first, you're like, okay, this is kind of impressive for a bit. Then you're like, okay, this is annoying. Like, you can't score. This is getting ridiculous. They're throwing Kel Thomas, throwing like other people in there because they put in the weekly shootout. And now I think we're getting back around to it's impressive. Where like I have my expectations once to hit 0 is like is that okay? We're going to be done in 2 or 3 rounds. This is just going to be the Gophers will not score. I can't wait to see how it doesn't happen. And then we'll move on for our lives because it doesn't really matter. And the best part is it's not even just the Big Ten shootouts or whatever. Like you can throw in the non-conference ones that are Who's Line style that don't count for anything. Like they don't score.
Yeah, they don't count for literally anything.
It's insanely impressive in a way that is like just pure futility. I almost feel that like if you and I tried this in going on to a college goalie, like I would love to see how many tries that it would take us, and like we would because it'd probably be something similar. But these are actually like decent players. These are actually like these are high end, high skilled elite athletes.
These are guys who've been playing competitive hockey since they started grade school. Basically, it's
the odds are at some point. This is like those years where like the Wolves would be in the lottery every year and like never move up. And like someone did the math one time and it was like the Wolves had like a 99% chance at one point to move up in the draft, like move up in the lottery, and it never happened until. I'm blanking on what year they finally won it. Was it finally?
Yeah,
it was
Karl Anthony Towns years, whatever they 2013 or 14 maybe. But it's the same thing. I mean, Twins streak too until last season. That was statistically almost. I mean, as statistically as impossible as that type of thing gets. For in like reality terms, like that shouldn't have happened that way. It shouldn't be possible to happen that way for a team that makes the playoffs. And there was a bunch of different stories. Aaron Gleeman on the Athletic, great reads on all that stuff. But back a year ago when the morale was so high around the Minnesota baseball team, but
good times.
Yeah,
good times.
It's wild, Nate. I mean, it'll be interesting to see when it happens, and I know there'll be a flurry of activity around Blue Sky and X and everything, and when that finally does happen, and say, I mean, the Pepperidge Farms remembers type memes will keep coming out, so
I
it'll
still
be
like
interesting to
that.
see.
I still like that it's been basically a decade of shootouts, and it's got like somehow it's still consistent around eras, around coaches, around players
Mm-hmm.
that they've won. I think just two in general.
Yeah, since the last
And
time they scored in a shootout, they've been to two. They've been to the Frozen Four 3 times. Like
yeah,
it's it it shouldn't be. Yeah,
yeah.
it's bizarre.
Let's just be happy that if you ever do like there's no shootout version to get through the NCAA tournament, which I
Mm-hmm.
think that's kind of one of the things where look, you lose a point here or there, it kind of adds up. It adds up, but
Mm-hmm.
like it doesn't really add up.
Yeah.
And also, it doesn't matter in the pairwise because all those games end as a tie.
Mm-hmm.
You're sending the crowd happy in theory. I mean, if you never score a goal, you're not really sending them happy unless you're on the road, I guess. But
Yeah. No.
I'm just really honestly, it is kind of going around to just being an
Mm-hmm.
impressive feat. And the day that they score a shootout goal will be like it'll be like like that like English bar when they scored like the World Cup and like
Yes. Oh
people
yeah.
always show that one.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be like that, but it'll be like wow, you guys are going nuts for life. Like they haven't scored a shootout goal in 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it doesn't count for anything. But hey, they haven't scored in 5 years.
It's something. It's something that I know a lot of longtime Gopher fans will definitely be paying attention to next time it happens.
Yeah,
But obviously that type of futility behind us. Nate, let's talk a little bit what we were alluding to about Saturday. Gophers were up 3-1. Also, Matthew Wood came back. He was gone for Friday's game because he was trying out for the Canadian World Juniors team, and he actually unfortunately for him, he got a quick boot from that camp and they said, you know what, you're just not making the team. Benefit for the Gophers, they got him back. He looked really good on Saturday. I thought from a playmaking standpoint, they needed the body, of course. But yeah, it was good to have him back to see that, but also just the Gophers again, shorthanded, needing some guys that aren't used to playing regular minutes for the team to fill in a lot of those spots. And down the stretch after the 3-1 lead, the Gophers still had got a few chances in even late in that third period. And then once the 8 minute mark hit, they were hemmed into their own zone, couldn't get clears late, kind of fanned on clearing attempts. They just didn't land where they wanted them to, and Michigan State capitalized and tied it quickly, and then took the lead and eventually got an empty net goal. It was definitely interesting to see, and as we talked about before, it kind of that mix between fatigue and or Michigan State just being a good team. But that's one that the Gophers certainly would want back after they were so close to keeping that lead and to getting a little bit of revenge on the shootout loss on Friday night.
it felt a little bit more fatigue than some of the others because I know Michigan State in the last couple of years has had a couple big comebacks against the Gophers,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of one of those things where you see where Minnesota was, where they're able to avoid those late third period blown leads or just keeping the games closer than they were. But in this case, it felt like Michigan State certainly is a talented team, but the way things are going, and you saw the Gophers even up 3-1, it wasn't in a shell. They're continuing to go the offense.
Mm-hmm.
They had a chance. They had a good chance. They almost went up 4-1 right before giving
Yeah.
up the second goal, and it's kind of like the highlight of then right after that things just went downhill, and they went downhill quick.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where I'm like the Gophers are certainly the program they're in a better spot, and they're certainly able to manage resilience much better. I saw it a bunch this weekend where just even taken away from the depth, it's the fact that they went down 1-0, they got back on the boat. They got back really quick. They scored again to make it 2-1. Same thing on Friday, just where it didn't feel like until the last bit, every lead was kind of going back and forth. But at the same time, yeah, just the way when when the wheels kind of came off, they came off, and The Spartans just, I mean, that's going to be one where you look at it and they're going to have to that as much as we said the first period of Friday last week is something that the Gophers are going to really remember. And we're going to be able to look at the point and be like, this is why Minnesota can be a national championship team. They're also going to point out that those last 10 minutes of Saturday in this series to be like, hey, remember that this is what you need to get through. This is what you need to improve upon and to show that you can be that national championship team.
Exactly. And it's, especially the weekend wasn't devoid of complete bright spots. I think another weekend solidifying Brody Lamb. I wrote in our little notes, is he the best forward on this Gophers team right now in terms of just production? I know, like, raw talent level. If you were playing video game mode, he might not have the highest numbers next to his totals and his speed and his shot and everything, but he was a demon on Friday night in the first period, like, collecting chances. He was just everywhere that the Gophers were making, threatening to score. He was there. I thought he had another weekend where he looked really, really good. Brody Ziemer and Jimmy Snuggerud, those two connecting on a lot of different chances. I mean, Ziemer had 3 goals, Snuggerud 2 assists. Those two are continuing the chemistry, especially after the Clark Wood Kurth line has kind of obviously faded a little bit from their not always playing together, obviously, anymore, but also just their production levels from the start of non-conference play. They've been looking for more chemistry elsewhere, but Nate, they're certainly not lacking of bright spots. And even Saturday, too, goaltending-wise, Liam Souliere also, I thought, looked really good. Another weekend of the Gophers goalies looking really good. But just up front, Brody Lamb making a claim and Brody Ziemer really showing, kind of taking the mantle from August Falloon, as we talked last week, as he didn't play this week, and showing, all right, freshmen, we're here, but we're gonna make a difference too.
They certainly are. I mean, or if your name's Brody, you're making a difference.
The Brodies, it's the Brody
Brodies,
team.
The Brodies. We'll have Falloon and Paulson. We'll have like secret Brodies when they come back. Like, seriously though, like, you have an entire fourth line that is on the shelf this weekend, which feels just insanely crazy to say. And that Minnesota like had a fourth line that still was not a fourth line, and then competed against the top 5 team in the country. It's honestly. It's one of those things where, hey, that is the hand that you were dealt. And there's a couple times this weekend too, just other aspects where, like, this is the hand that you're dealt, and good teams are able to just kind of roll with it and make things better. And we've kind of seen it on the big national picture where the best teams are the ones that roll and are able to take anything that comes at them. And the teams that aren't are the ones that are struggling, and they're seeing them kind of lower in the rankings and the standings. There's a lot of teams who were thought to be high in the preseason that, they had some injuries, some chemistry maybe didn't work out, and just they haven't been able to put things together yet, as opposed to you're seeing maybe like a Michigan State certainly doing it, Minnesota's doing it. Kind of seen a couple other teams maybe start to turn things around, but that to me has kind of been the difference, and no one really shows that more, I think, than the guy you mentioned at the beginning, Brody Lamb, who even from game 1 to now has certainly he continues to develop. He always kind of had high hopes of being a really good college player, and it feels like each week he takes a level. It's been a very consistent growth where he is doing everything that Bob Moscow wants of him, and he is contributing in every facet of the game. Honestly, I think even Jimmy Snuggerud didn't score, but it seems like that he is certainly someone who makes players better around him. And this is something that I don't even know if you saw that last year, and that feels like a big difference. You still have the NHL shot, but when you're able to make everyone around you better and kind of take the focus away, and you have other high scoring players, especially at a time where Friday night, no Matthew Wood, he comes back Saturday at least, but you're able to, like, hey, we can rely. We have a Brody Lamb. Brody Ziemer is going to come in and also contribute. We don't have a third Brody, but you know what? Aaron Hughlin still is healthy in this one. He's going to be able to look good at times and show why it feels like he does that on like a little bit of a lower level where he raises the game of everybody. That is something I kind of noticed a little bit in Friday's game because Huglin's kind of spent a lot of time as the veteran with some of the younger players, and when you kind of put him up on the lineup a little bit, he makes that transition really easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a good weekend, and especially from seeing those positives stand out despite the lacking in lineup options, especially. But I mean, even as you mentioned, Jimmy Snuggerud too. Like that's the reason he came. That's like he's developed in the reason he basically came back. Like he needed to add that next level to his game to like, all right, rather than just being a great guy or a great guy on his own right, he's going to be a guy now that makes everybody else around him a little better. And I think that's what was missing from his game last year, especially coming back to school. That's what he's going to want. That's kind of what he should have wanted to use this season to do to get ready for that NHL level, to take that ability that he has and be a real impact player sooner at the NHL level. And I think the signs we've seen from him so far this year being so impactful on or off the score sheet has been really nice to see. And it's, good for the St. Louis Blues. I think they're going to get they're going to get a much more rounded player now than if he would have signed when they were trying to get him to sign back last summer. But Nate, one question on the first half for you here before we kind of go around the conference a little bit into the around the conference. I think this is the Big Ten championship game, Minnesota, Michigan State. What do you think?
I'll agree with you. These teams have shown they have separated each other. The next year, Michigan. I'm trying to think honestly whether I put Michigan close in the same tier or not. But I believe these are the two best teams in the Big Ten. Michigan, if they are not in this tier, they're a step down, but they're above Wisconsin and Ohio State. And those two are certainly fighting over their own little love of who's going to host one another in the Big Ten. And then it's a couple steps down, and then it's Penn State, Notre Dame are kind of they're on in the bottom, where they're still good teams, but they're not at the same level as the other five.
Exactly. Yeah, I think after seeing what we saw this weekend, this is certainly if the two teams can continue on the trajectory that they're headed, this has to be the runaway favorite for Big Ten championship game come end of the season. Kind of fighting for that tournament crown to see what ends up happening between then and now. Obviously, a lot of conference games. The Gophers have a few weeks off here, as we'll talk about in a minute. But go around the conference, see what happened this past week, Nate, in the Big Ten. One thing that was really interesting to see, Minnesota's last opponent, Michigan, they won another game without scoring a goal. They lost to Wisconsin 4-0 on Friday and lost, and then Wisconsin ended up losing 3-2 in overtime to Michigan on Saturday. What a weird run for the Wolverines. It's hard to know what to make of them as they hit the slide, and maybe as we saw from their ability to kind of folding a little bit under duress. Maybe that goes beyond just in-game momentum. It looks to have affected them, obviously, in a few games in a stretch here.
Yeah, you don't want to match Minnesota's forwards on Friday in periods that you haven't scored. That's pretty much where Michigan was. But and also Wisconsin almost came back. The crazy thing is, I feel like we're seeing this as more of an indictment on the Badgers, where they also blanked Michigan State the weekend before and had a close Saturday game. And Wisconsin nearly came back and stole Saturday's game against Michigan, which feels like you're kind of seeing that difference where Wisconsin, where as opposed to that talent's there, but just you can't see things going in, just everything's just slightly off. It feels like this is the Mike Hastings. This is the Mike Hastings style of just you're tinkering, you're getting things to fit into place, and all of a sudden they're fitting in place. I'm really curious to see how the Badgers are in the second half. I still think there are some question marks, but there's a reason it's really tough to doubt Mike Hastings and why he's not had a losing season in a couple decades across college hockey, and I think the USHL as well.
Yeah, especially, as far as second half teams go, I think they might have the most stark difference between their first half and their second half results, especially as they begin to figure things out with this roster. And like you said, Mike Hastings he's not going to go down without a fight, and that team is going to figure things out at a pretty rapid pace. I think beyond what disarray they looked like earlier in the season for sure. Moving on to the Gophers' next conference opponent, which is pretty much a month from now. Ohio State beat Notre Dame 3-2 in overtime on Friday, and then got a regulation win 3-1 Saturday. Notre Dame slipping just like Penn State. Is it good to see Ohio State another week on track after they had that kind of faltering week against the East Coast teams and kind of coming back into their own to fight for a higher position in that Big Ten conference standings?
It's making that weekend against Princeton kind of seem a little bit like a anomaly, just a little bit not the Buckeyes that you're used to, but also this season for the first half has been Ohio State's beaten without the exception of that one weekend. They've beaten the teams they're supposed to. They've lost to the teams that they're supposed to, and coming against the Gophers, I would assume that the Gophers are certainly a team that are in the latter category. So you're seeing good things about the Buckeyes, but at the same time, I'm still waiting to see Ohio State beat a team that we don't expect them to beat.
Yeah, and they're probably gonna continue on that trajectory. And you know what? I mean, if we see something from the Gophers against Mercyhurst, who knows? Who knows if we'll change our prediction? But I don't know if they're supposed to beat the Gophers. I don't really think so, but we'll see if they're able to.
No. I will tell you. I'll tell you this right now. I know Mercyhurst's record. The answer is no.
Yeah, well, exactly. I'm saying beyond that for Ohio State.
Okay.
If we see something about the Gophers absolutely fall apart against Mercyhurst, maybe I'll change my mind. But I don't think Ohio State's projected to necessarily beat Minnesota. We'll see if that can happen the next week. But once January 2025 hits. But one more game in the conference, not a conference matchup, in conference matchup, but Penn State playing against an Army team where that was that school's biggest game this weekend, of course. Penn State beat them 4-1. They played in Washington, D.C. Looks kind of cool seeing some of college hockey played at what is it, still Verizon? No, it's the Capital One Arena or something like that. But cool to see that played. I saw a few clips of that, but they handily beat Army 4-1. But Nate, that kind of leads us to the last little bit of our podcast here. Standings after the first half. Obviously not just the full first half of conference play, but first half of play, kind of a natural break in the schedule as the calendar turns to 2025. Here are the Big Ten standings for you. Minnesota, 24 points in the lead in 10 games played. Michigan State, though, is not far behind. They've got 19 points in 8 games played. Wisconsin also has the same amount of points as Michigan State, 19, but in 4 more games played in 12 games. So we'll see Michigan State likely pull ahead there at that point once they catch up in games. Ohio State following closely behind, 16 points in 8 games. Michigan, 13 points in 8 games. And then, like you said, the drop-off, Nate, comes Notre Dame, 4 points in 10 games. Penn State, just 1 point in 8 conference games so far. The Gophers heading into the break with a 15-3-2 record. It should be interesting to see how they come back. Mercyhurst is next up, as we mentioned, January 3rd and 4th. It'll be interesting to see how healthy they are. I think that's the biggest point about that part of the schedule, to see how healthy the Gophers are come New Year, and to see, all right, are they going to be ready to tune things up into Ohio State once the conference play resumes. But Nate, any thoughts on the Big Ten standing so far, and maybe looking ahead to Mercyhurst in a couple of weeks?
It's crazy how the split of games has been, where Wisconsin's had 12, most of the teams have 8.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a really odd split. Like I understand, like it's 3 teams have 10 or 12, the rest have 8. It's kind of crazy. Although even just looking around the big picture, where teams have played a number of non-conference games, I mean, even the ones who have struggled in Big Ten play have done extremely well in non-conference play. We mentioned Ohio State's done extremely well. Notre Dame has held their own. They probably struggled the most out of anyone, and they're still over 500 in their non-conference record. Penn State's 7-1-0 in non-conference. The Gophers as much as we said about their weak schedule, they beat the teams that they should. And you know what?
Mm-hmm.
When you beat the teams that you should, it goes a long way. The tough part is that you don't have as much room. So you don't have as much room when things fall and go awry as you would when you play a tougher schedule. But when things are but when you pull it off, it works. It works certainly well. And I mean, we're going to have another version of that for Minnesota playing Mercyhurst, who is certainly one of, if not the worst teams in college hockey. This is actually, you can make the argument this is a bigger series weekend for pairwise purposes than the playing Michigan State this past weekend.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
Good wins are certainly important, but bad losses hurt far more than good wins help. That is the big key, especially as we're hitting second half of the year. We'll talk pairwise a little bit more as it makes more sense. At this point, we're kind of just looking around to understand where the conferences are lying out and how many teams can kind of the conferences are looking for in each way. But for Minnesota, this might be honestly one of the biggest weekend in the series of one of the biggest weekends they have remaining in the regular season, because you need 2 wins. There's no way around it.
2 clean wins at home.
2 clean wins.
Not an option to lose here at Mariucci against a team like you mentioned is going to be competing for the worst pairwise position in the country this year. So it is a double-edged sword. You say, okay, it should be a pretty straightforward couple of games, but if it's not, that's going to be tough going down the stretch for the Gophers. So. Nate, you and I will be here. I know probably a couple times during the break. I've got one neat podcast idea that you guys all have to tune in to listen to us go through it once we have that all put together. But kind of a fun away from the regular grind of each weekend in, weekend out. But excited to put that one together for you guys. But Nate, for you and I, until the next time we chat, we'll see you at the rink.